Hi. Uh, so we're going to talk about settler colonialism, module two. All right. So in talking about settler colonialism, I'm going to use three terms: settler, indigenous other, and exogenous other. Before I provide context to all three terms and how they are in relationship with one another, I want to address the term settler. Okay, so there may be participants who feel offended by being referred to as a settler, as it can be construed as derogatory. By definition, a settler is a person who is themselves or a descendant from ancestors who came and settled in a land inhabited by Indigenous people. So it can be difficult to hear, especially when learning about settler colonialism, as we are talking about land dispossession for the removal of Indigenous peoples. There is another element that can also cause an emotional response, and that is by existence as a settler. We are complicit to the settler colonial project. So make space for your feelings and do so without judgment. And I also ask that you extend the same sentiment towards others as well. It can be painful when opening oneself to learning and the growth that comes from that process. However, the benefits of such processes actually outweigh the status quo of the harm and denial. Okay, so the reason I'm starting with settler colonialism is that it informs actually the Discover Canada Guide and Citizenship. It is central to my objective of putting into the same conversation citizenship, the TRC, the guide, and ESL through law, education, and colonial pedagogy. So, how to recognize settler colonialism? To begin, settler colonialism is distinguishable and it is a separate form of colonialism. It replaces and continues to supplant Indigenous populations with an invasive settler society. So, gradually, a settler society such as Canada, the US, South Africa, and Australia, what we've done is we have developed a distinctive identity and sovereignty. So, it's also important to realize that settler colonialism is not an historical event, nor do tracing legacies of imperialism through settlement colonies position settler colonialism in the past. Instead, it's understanding that settler colonialism is rooted in modern liberalism that manifested colonization, enslavement, capitalism, coerced labor practices, and Indigenous genocide. These are the three key features that identify settler colonialism as a structure. So the first is, unlike traders, soldiers, and governors who acted as colonial agents to extract resources, settlers stayed. Settler colonialism also maintains its structure in the ongoing assertion of state sovereignty and judicial control over Indigenous lands through Indigenous elimination. Okay? So, severance of the political allegiance to the founding metropole, such as in Canada's case, Great Britain, does not end settler colonialism. Settler colonialism also eliminates colonial differences between the unchallenged settler state and people not for the purposes of decolonization. Instead, its purpose is to extinguish the challenges posed to settler sovereignty by Indigenous claims to land, by erasing Indigenous peoples and asserting false narratives of settler belonging. And the guide enforces these key features. So, settler colonialism thrives under a system of relationships of three different agencies, which I sort of highlighted when I began. The colonizer, the Indigenous colonized, and the exogenous others, the subaltern. And we will talk about subaltern in a bit. But generally, the subaltern are the voiceless, the silenced. Okay, so while Canada has severed its ties to the British metropole, The metropolitan agency that interposes its sovereignty between the three communities has its origins in the imperial settler colonial project. Through this relationship, settlers demand their autonomous capacity to control Indigenous policy, while interposing their sovereignty between Indigenous and exogenous others to, to manage, not maintain, to manage the population economy. It is understood in this dynamic of relationships, the Indigenous and exogenous others are to progressively disappear through a variety of ways, from ethnic cleansing to assimilation. Settler colonial societies rely on constructs of spatiality, power structures, and social narratives to make claims of history in settler jurisdiction. So these pictures are actually from the Discover Canada Guide. So elemental to settler colonial societies is the doctrine of terra nullius, which creates the perception that lands are empty or uninhabited by Indigenous peoples. Settler colonialism appropriates Indigenous held lands and fashions them into parcels of private property. The settler colonial identity of material belonging to land through property simultaneously empowers the right to defend said properties from Indigenous peoples whose claims to the land threaten the settler colonial collective. The structure of settler colonialism empowered and continues to legitimize frontier police, who we now refer to as the RCMP, as well as bureaucratic agencies and government officials, such as Indian agents, who exercise extraordinary power over Indigenous peoples. Indian agents seized Indigenous children, contained Indigenous peoples on reserved land, or even expelled them. They also marshaled police and military against the Indigenous peoples. Racist and false narratives justify these powers and their use through dehumanization of Indigenous peoples, while portraying narratives of settlers as adventurous and benevolent. The entrenchment of racist and false narratives are further enforced through educational structures to normalize settler colonialism. As an invisible structure, it intersects with other social institutions, including health, family, government, religion, and the economy. Okay, so I welcome you to do a short activity. You can find it in Module 2, Settler Colonialism in the document, and it's just a short true-false activity. Anyways, you can pause the recording. I'm now going to talk about language imperialism. All right, so linguistic imperialism is the entrenchment of the dominant language over affected peoples in all social and legal systems by an imperial power. When power and privilege are held by those who speak the colonial language, there is language-based discrimination, especially against the Indigenous peoples and non-dominant language-speaking immigrants. Historical policies and legacies of linguistic assimilation by colonial forces on Indigenous and immigrant communities show strategic linguism established in our social systems. Policies such as multiculturalism obscure social injustices, in particular those inflicted on Indigenous peoples by the Canadian government. So our lens for language is through the polarity of English and French, in which both continue to rival for cultural recognition. And this is a linguistic conflict. Consequently, we ignore the diversity of Indigenous languages that predate European contact. Such a normalized tradition is the result of the targeted suppression of Indigenous languages and culture by hundreds of years of British, French, and Canadian language policies. So the power dynamics are inherent to the imperial project, and its goal is to extinguish Indigenous culture that still continues. So we can look at Section 27 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which talks about multiculturalism. but fails to mention the unique heritage of the Indigenous peoples. It acts as if Canada has no pre existing identities. Furthermore, the Constitution Act of 1867, as an official document, is English only. While Canada claims two official languages, French translations are unofficial because the document was constituted in English by the UK Parliament. The Canada Act 1982 also has no official French language version for the same reason. The Official Languages Act acknowledges two official languages, French and English, for government and government services. Only the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut offer services in Indigenous languages. The Canadian Multiculturalism Act provides citizens the right to maintain their identities and religion without fear of persecution and extends acceptance to other cultures. Unfortunately, the Bilingualism and Multiculturalism Acts reinforce linguistic and racialized hierarchies that privilege English and French, English more than French, as legitimate languages to Canadian identity over Indigenous languages. So, as language is inextricable to culture, it also enforces notions of Canadian identity. So, furthermore, Canadian immigrants understand they must conform to Western European English and French speaking, but English speaking before 1988. Today, they choose between French and English as their official language to meet their citizenship requirements. So it's still assimilation. By delineating immigrant languages in Canadian policy from English and French, Indigenous legal scholar Laura Davis argues this kind of distinction erases that English and French are also immigrant languages to Turtle Island, in which Canada is now part. We are socialized to connect our official languages as our authentic languages to this land. And Gramsci reinforces this construct through his reflections of knowledge and language attributions. Under the Eurocentric control of our archive of knowledge, the diminishment of spoken language cultures as quote unquote folkloric, such as Indigenous culture and language, from content to storytelling and ways of being, is to silence and undermine their value to knowledge and knowledge creation. The explicit exclusion of Indigenous peoples from multiculturalism underscores Indigenous languages and their values in official and non-official capacities. Assimilatory policies of language and acquisition and residential schooling divided and continue to divide native and non-native English and French speakers, all of which is critical to colonial pedagogical practices that normalize requirements for assimilation over the empowerment of integration through diversity, equity, inclusion, and indigeneity. So I've tried to put activities in these recordings just to make it not so much me lecturing. I'd like you to reflect or think about things that I'm saying because I want you to come to this workshop through a position of inquiry and come to your conclusions. So please see the short passage in the activity section in the main document for Module 2, and please read the passage and highlight or write down knowledge that you have learned. And can you connect this knowledge into your pedagogical approach for reconciliation? All right, so I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in this module. Hopefully see you in Module 3. Oh, as a closing, I always want to show these are in the main document, but I also want to show who I'm referencing. And also in the main document, you'll find links to um, to these resources. I think maybe 3 or 4 out of the entire workshop, I was not able to get public access, but everything else I was able to get public access. So it's accessible and you can do a deeper review. All right, hopefully see you again in Module 3.